Hey, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Writer's Bookshelf. So today we're going to change course a little bit and we're going to move away from characters, sort of. We're going to actually move into settings now, which I guess you can argue is a type of character depending on what you're writing about. But for the most part, we're going to be discussing the places where your characters meet and have their conflicts and do all the fun things that characters do, but in places that's familiar to them, and hopefully to you. And the book that's going to talk about that today is The Writer's Guide to Active Setting by Mary Buckham. And as usual, I apologize if you are the author of this book and I pronounced your name wrong, but you know what, that's just how my ear works sometimes, and that is unfortunate. But oh, and it's a forward here. But anyway, this book is designed to help you identify how to craft active settings, or in other words, settings that work for your story, that make sense for your story, without being boring or without ruining it for your reader. So I don't expect this to be a long video. There's not a lot to say in regard to what the book covers, because it is, again, it's a craft book that's focused entirely on the idea of building places for your characters to interact. But what's important here is why you choose the settings that you do. So for example, like, you know, why choose New York over Boston, or why choose any city over a tropical island? Every choice you make in the settings will somehow impact the way the story plays out. And if it doesn't, then maybe the setting is either A, not fleshed out well enough, or B, isn't as important as you thought it was. So when you're getting a book like this, what you're actually doing is you're learning what makes the setting important to your story and how to make it important to your story. So what I want to do is, as usual, I want to show you what it looks like on the interior, so you can kind of get a feel for what's in there and all that fun stuff. So every book in the writer's market here, is this right? Yeah, Writer's Digest will typically have a nice little division for your sections here, and of course you got one like that here with part 1, characterization, sensory detail, and all that. And you'll notice that they're going right into characterization. You can't really have a good setting without good characters to populate that setting, and that's just, I think, a kind of a flat understanding of, you know, if you write about a park and you talk about the birds and you know, the waste baskets and things that you might find in the park, if somebody's not interacting with that park, do you really care? And as a reader, the idea is, no, you're probably not going to care that much unless there's something really distinctive about that park, or, you know, maybe the park is, you got a history with some kind of crime. Maybe that used to be a toxic waste dump, and somehow they figured out how to pave the toxic waste over with grass and dandelions and butterflies. You know, maybe that's your backstory for that park, in which case that might be interesting. But even then, unless somebody's going to go walking across that park, who cares? I mean, it's a neat little piece of history, a piece of information for that town, that setting, or whatever. But if it doesn't affect the story at all, it's not going to matter that much to your reader, and, you know, certainly your characters may not care that much either, or if they do, they're probably lying to you. So the idea is you want to make the setting matter, and so what this book will do is it'll certainly walk you through the process of creating settings that matter to your story. And so one example they give you is in the first chapter. You want to get started with active settings, so they are giving you a fair introduction. The one thing that she says in the book is the active setting means you're using your setting details to work harder and smarter. First, you should focus on what seems like a basic assumption. Your reader has never been in your world, wherever your world is. It doesn't matter if it's New York City and most of your readers live in Manhattan. Your reader has never been to, you know, Syntax, your world. The setting and world you'll paint on the page are more than a travelogue or a list of street names. Not everything that a character sees, smells, tastes, or touches needs to end up in your final manuscript, but it's a place to start. And then she just goes on from there. Basically, she's trying to make the point that whatever you decide your setting is, it's going to be important to your story because you are making it important to your story, because you're going to angle it in a way that is unique to the world you're building that any common reader won't know. So, for example, you know, I live in South Florida, and you know, I think there's a nasty rumor that not everybody who you know, who's born in Florida stays in Florida, or vice versa, and that's actually pretty true. It's hard to meet somebody who's both a native and a you know, an adult who lives here. I'm actually one of the few who I was born here and I've stayed here. I never left. Sometimes I wanted to, but you know, but I have a perspective in that I like flat land. I've gotten used to flat land. Once upon a time, I went to try to go to Atlanta, Georgia, in that region where there's a lot of hills, and I just within a couple of days, I wanted to come back home because I just couldn't stand all the hills. Like it was fun to drive for a while, but then it got not fun to drive. And and I remember the second night, it was dark and rainy, and I was going up a hill and I had the rain like coming down at me, not on me but at me. And I thought I never have to experience this where I am. So not only that, but I didn't have the beach nearby, and but here I'm just too used to having the beach. And if you've seen my little icon down there on my page, I have the ocean behind me, and I like my beach setting, but my take on it is going to be different than my neighbors, who aren't necessarily from around here. For them, it might be a little more exploratory, might be more of a tourist situation, although they've been here long enough. I'm sure they've gotten used to it. Or my brother-in-law, who came from the up north, and where it snows. Everybody's got their own experience with the location they come to. I'm not going to have the same perspective because I'm used to it. I've been here for so long that I really don't have a lot of experience in other regions. I've seen snow once when I was right, not out of college, but I was in that age where I was wrapping it up, and I don't have a lot of outside experience with other regions, just like people from other regions may not have experience of having year-round constant climate, with it's predominantly humid, and 3 times a year we get the mosquito or the gnat swarms. For being someone who has lived here as long as I have, and had my experiences that I've had, I'm going to know my setting better. But what I describe in my book, should I ever set it here, and I'm not one of these people who has to set my book. Carl Hiaasen will do that, and Dave Barry will do that. I don't really do that. I like to travel around in my characters. But if I do choose to, settle my characters here, I'm going to have the insight that that a lot of people who are researching from afar aren't going to have. And so my perspective matters to any readers, especially if they know I'm from this area. So, and I think it's true too, like, if you're writing from Wyoming, for whatever reason, Wyoming is like my new interesting place to look at as a, as a setting area. And I don't know, I probably read too many books, but as someone who does not around mountains, especially not tall mountains, having the backdrop of this huge, ice-covered mountain, it's kind of cool to me. But I couldn't really simulate that authentically without having been there. So, like, my take on it might be might be fake. Let's just call it what it is. It might not be, as authentic as someone who's lived there could reiterate back to me in the writing. So the setting, in my perspective of a place I've never been to, will have a different type of lens. And it doesn't necessarily make it a bad lens, but the experience the reader has with my take on Wyoming will differ from the experience that they'll have for my take on Florida versus the take that another writer from Wyoming might have on Wyoming and Florida, for that matter. So that's the point that she's making is, when you set out to write about a setting, your take on it will affect the reader in some emotional way. And so it doesn't hurt to get it right and learn how to do that and incorporate it well. So going back to the book, what this book does is it actually gives you examples, what they call the poor example and the better example, the rewritten example. And this is where they'll take a flat sentence and they'll flesh it out to something more intriguing. But one thing that they're not doing is they're not flourishing it with what they call purple prose, which is like an old 19th century trend. What they're actually doing is they're trying to make the setting part of the story, part of the character even, so that when the characters interact with the setting, it makes sense. Maybe even adds to the drama or the conflict. So in this one example here, the poor example is, Sue walked into her mother's living room past the couch and the coffee table to sit down in a chair. And so the question she asks is, what is the above sentence showing you? What is it revealing to you? What is it letting you experience? Not much. It's simply moving a character through space. And when we're trying to be minimal, that might make sense, but that's not interesting to your reader when we're minimal. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to give you another way of approaching that same scene for it to matter to your story. So the rewritten example is: Sue walked into the gilt and silk living room for her mother's home, gagging on the clash of floral odors, lilac potpourri, jasmine candles, lavender sachets. Did her mom even smell the cloying thickness anymore? Did she ever try to glance beyond the draped and berry-bound window coverings that kept the room in perpetual dusk? Or was she using the white-on-white colors and velvet textures to hide from the real world? With a sigh, Sue sank into the designer chair and hoped she could crawl out of it sooner rather than later. So that's one example she gives. She actually gives another example if you don't like that particular one. But the point is she's trying to make the scene a source of conflict or a source of drawing the character out to reality. So and that's just chapter 1. And the whole purpose of this is to show that setting is not a throwaway thing. It's really easy to throw setting away when you're writing, especially when you're plot heavy, because if you're to go back to our park example, if you're saying that Bob goes to the park, where he found a briefcase in the tree, the briefcase is probably the most important part of that scene. Bob being there, of course, is important too, but you're writing a mystery and the answers inside the briefcase. It might be that you don't actually care, that the park is on the ancient side of a toxic waste dump, or that the tree is glowing purple. That might not be as important to you as what's inside the briefcase. And in fact, it might not even be conducive to mention those details if it's going to take away from the revelation that's inside the briefcase. But if you open the briefcase and see that it's glowing inside, and maybe it had a dossier, but that dossier was ruined because the radioactivity, and I'm not researching obviously, but if the radioactivity of the ground soil somehow seeped into the briefcase, because the briefcase has been sitting under a tree for 3 days, and it's just enough to get into the fabric of both the case and the paper itself, and now it's glowing to the point where if the hero even touches it, they'll get contaminated with radioactivity. The setting suddenly matters, and the reader's going to want to know that. And I know it's an extreme example, but the point is your settings, they do play a function in the story. If you care about your story, if you want your story to resonate in any way, to have any kind of character or any kind of relevance to where it takes place or anything like that, you'll flesh out the details enough to make it matter to your story. So I'm going to just go over quickly what the contents are here so you know what they're talking about. So they deal with characterization and sensory details, part 1, motion, conflict, and backstories, part 2, and then anchoring, action, setting as character, and more is part 3. This is important because what they're actually doing in the book is they're walking you through the process of setting up the importance of setting and then bringing you into the action of setting. So it's almost like a little mini course in developing a setting that works for your story in a way that matches the tone and theme and all that of your story. So there's only 10 chapters here. It's a 200-page book, or a little over 200 pages. So the chapters are in themselves kind of longish, but it's a small book, like lengthwise. So each page is not that dense. There's a lot of white space, so it's easy to get through the end there. And I read it pretty quickly. And overall, I think it's a good book to have as a kind of a resource for setting. But the individual chapters are getting started with active setting, using subjective setting detail to reveal character, using sensory detail to enhance setting. That's all part 1. And then part 2 is using setting to show emotion, using setting to create complication, using setting to show backstory. And then part 3, using setting to anchor the reader, using setting to in an action sequence, using setting as a character in your story, and then the double and the setting details. And that's really it. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of complication and understanding the point. And I think when you get to the end of it, I mean, you are going to be more likely to write a story that is not bogged down by pointless scenes. I think you will find a way to integrate the important elements of a piece of setting in order to bring out the best in your characters and your situation, and that includes things like things where the setting's in action, like if you're driving and trying to have a conversation while weaving in and out of traffic, while running from the bad guys or whatever, or if your characters are out on a boat and hurricanes coming, being on a boat in a hurricane is not really the best place to be. So that would certainly elevate the conflict, and just little things like that. This book will help you to really envision a plan for your characters in your story, to really elevate not only the conflict but the interest and even the authenticity of the place, the uniqueness of it. What is Empire Falls? So that Empire Falls. And if you're not sure what that is, look it up. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book. What is Winesburg, Ohio? I think it's called the one by Sherwood Anderson. And that, like, what is that story without the setting? An occurrence in Elk Creek Bridge. What is the story without Elk Creek Bridge? Or the situation that the character finds himself in. So, overall, it's not an item you want to just leave on the table. It's really easy to overlook these things when we're plot heavy, when we're trying to throw things at the reader in a hurry. But it's not telling you need to write fluid pages of detail. In fact, it's actually going the opposite of that. It's telling you specifically, don't write a flat scene, don't write a flat setting. Have it mean something. Have it, in motion of some sort. It doesn't have to mean like, get the park to get up and walk. It's saying, give that park a reason to exist in your story, and find the things about it that make it not only interesting, but make it relevant to your story. So again, if it's built on the old toxic dump, we're gonna want to see a little bit of bubbling happening. And it might just be that the hero knows about the bubbling. Maybe he's trying to lure the bad guy to that spot where the bubbles are happening. Maybe that's how he defeats the bad guy. There's so many ways to look at it. But this is a good way to really get into the practice of making our scenes matter. So again, it's Writer's Guide to Active Setting. I don't have a lot to say about it. I just wanted to make sure you all knew about the book. I personally think it's a really great read for what it is, and certainly one to have on your shelf especially if you're bad at writing settings. So if you're the kind of person who can go out into the real world and just observe and kind of take in things and still be able to pinpoint what's interesting about those scenes and leave the rest behind, then maybe the book isn't something you absolutely need. But I think being aware of what you're doing is also as good as learning how to do it, because it just forces you to focus more on the good practices. So either way, I think it's worth having, and I think you should invest in it. So again, The Writer's Guide to Active Setting by Mary Buckham. So we're going to do another setting book. So we talked about in the past, we did the different thesauruses from Writers Helping Writers. So next week we're going to do the others that they have. They're based on settings. I'll talk about those. You can preview it ahead of time, but I still want to promote the video because it'll be a good one, hopefully. But if you like this video, if you like this topic, please like and subscribe to all the things that YouTubers tell you to do. Hit the like button, hit the bell, and then leave a comment. Don't forget that you can share your experiences on this page if you need to. You can tell us about the book you're writing, or if you have questions about if you're writing a scene and you're not sure if the setting is too much. If maybe you're trying to develop a fair balance between what your character experiences and what your reader experiences, and you don't want to oversell either one or undersell. I mean, you can put the passages in there if you want, as long as it's not like, don't give me chunks, because we do want to just respect your copyright, and we want to respect your sampling and all that. So do be considerate of the sample sizes if you're going to share what you're writing. But Otherwise, send us to your webpage if you're working on something and you have examples over there. But just again, let's keep this interactive as a community and things. So let us know what you're working on. And then visit my site too, jeremybursey.com. Hopefully it's open now, and if it's not, it will be soon. Just give us feedback. So that's all for today. So hope you liked the video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye. I'm not doing very well with pronouncing authors' names this season, but you know what? It's fine. Well, probably not for them. Yeah.